the floor where they drop like bombs. Faceless voices running all the cons. Digital whispers in a binary night. No light, no face, pure sound, no sight. Stories unfold in the dark, unscrolled. Echoes of silence, secrets untold. Waves crash loud in this audio cave. No mic, no fame, just the sound we crave. Tune and turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just a vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. In shadows, voices untamed. No need for spotlight, no claim to fame. Just a beat of life in a stream of thought. Every word a punchline, no need to be taught. Just listen close, no visuals needed. Raw conversation, unprocessed, unseated. Feel the pulse in every sentence said. No distractions, just thoughts in your head. Whispers of the streets, rumbling through. Faceless yet vivid, a world in view. No mic, just souls, connecting in flow. Pure and raw, let the rhythm go.
Darwin stares into space for a moment before blinking and shaking his head. Thank you, young fellow. I must admit I am quite fascinated by your strange clothes. What year might this be? That is a rather complicated matter, but I'll try to summarize, young fellow. Darwin pauses. Natural selection is a very apt phrase in summarizing my theory because it describes how organisms that are best adapted to their environment will prevail and the weakest will die out over time, a process that is quite similar to artificial selection, which humans perform every day when breeding plants and animals for specific traits. Darwin pauses and sighs. Did that explain it well enough? Darwin pauses to think. In my time, there was quite a bit of confusion and debate about evolution, especially concerning the origin of species. Many people believed in the concept of special creation, or the idea that all species were completely separate and unconnected. The term transmutation was also used, but it had a somewhat negative connotation, as it implied that species had randomly changed over time. Darwin pauses and rubs his chin. To be honest, we still struggle with language to describe evolution today. Darwin gives a short laugh. Oh yes, absolutely. You must understand, my theories on evolution were entirely new and quite controversial in Victorian England. The very idea that all species shared a common ancestor was quite hard to wrap one's head around back then. Darwin furrows his brow. I had to spend many long hours trying to explain my ideas in simple terms that the public could understand, especially when it came to evolution by natural selection. Many people simply could not understand the complexity of the theory and resisted it vehemently. Darwin nods thoughtfully. Oh, very much so, I must say. Linnaeus was quite a brilliant man, and his work significantly impacted mine. The way he classified species and created a hierarchy of groups was absolutely fascinating, and I used his methodologies in my own works, especially my book on the origin of species. Darwin rubs his chin. But at the same time, I do think my work was quite different from Linnaeus's. While he focused more on the classification of species, I emphasized the process of speciation and the idea of natural selection. Darwin is quite pleased by this question. Latin played a significant role in shaping my scientific writing, especially earlier in my career. Back then, Latin was the lingua franca of science, and all scientific works were written in it. Even my own notes were in Latin, and sometimes I even thought in Latin. Darwin smiles widely and relaxes a little. Although I must admit it could be quite laborious to rely on Latin terminology, especially when I later had to translate them into English when formulating my theories on evolution. Darwin pauses for a moment, considering the question. I think English was quite well suited for describing biological processes, especially when it comes to certain concepts. English is quite flexible and versatile, and its vocabulary offers many useful words specifically suited for describing biological phenomena. That being said, other languages have their own virtues. French is perhaps a bit more subtle and nuanced in expressing scientific concepts, while German is more precise and rigorous. Darwin taps his fingers, thinking in my work I tried to use a balance of both coined terms and adaptations of existing usage. For certain concepts, such as natural selection and fitness, I felt it was necessary to coin new terms to more accurately represent the ideas I wanted to communicate. Darwin pauses, looking thoughtful, but for other concepts, I found that adapting existing terms could be quite useful. For example, the word speciation comes from the Latin species, which simply means species. Darwin rubs his chin, deep in thought. Yes, quite so. I had to be careful with my choice of metaphors and analogies when describing evolution. As you may know, the theory of evolution was quite controversial and often misunderstood during my time. Darwin pauses. Looking quite serious, I did my best to avoid any metaphors that might lead readers to misinterpret my theories as implying that evolution was somehow driven by teleological or purposive forces. Such ideas are quite false, and I did not want to mislead anyone. Darwin's face softens as he mentions his wife Emma. Ah, Emma. She was so supportive of my work, and her feedback was invaluable. She was quite insightful and had a keen eye for language. She would spend many hours reading through my drafts, suggesting revisions and fine-tuning the wording. Darwin smiles softly. Her feedback made On the Origin of Species a much more polished and accurate work. I am forever grateful to her for her support and wisdom. Darwin sighs, looking quite conflicted. Yes, unfortunately, I had to consider the possibility of offending religious readers quite often. Many people at the time held strong religious beliefs, and the concept of evolution contradicted such beliefs. Darwin rubs his forehead, looking rather conflicted. So yes, there were times when I had to revise my writing to soften certain terms or phrases that might offend such readers. It was not pleasant, but I felt it was necessary to avoid unnecessary backlash and distractions from the real scientific value of my theory. Darwin's eyes light up as he begins to describe his process. Naming new species was always quite a curious and interesting process for me. When I found a new species of plant or animal, I would first carefully observe and study its physical characteristics, making notes on its size, shape, color, and other features. Darwin pauses, as if recalling a memory. Then, I would compare the creature to similar species I had already encountered, trying to determine if it was unique or just a variation of something already known. Darwin chuckles. Ah, yes, the Beagle voyage. The sailors on that ship had quite the colorful and unique vocabulary, and their words did manage to make their way into my notes. Darwin smiles a little. Words like booby, nunnery, and smasher all have their origins in sailor slang. Sometimes they were quite useful for describing the new species I encountered. Darwin thinks for a moment, rubbing his chin. Yes, some concepts were definitely more challenging to express than others. Survival of the fittest was one such example. Darwin pauses, a look of concentration on his face. It was a difficult concept to convey to the public, as it implied that there was a notion of fitness or struggle in the process of evolution. Many people at the time found this idea distasteful and even unethical, as it seemed to imply that some organisms were simply better than others. Darwin smiles fondly, recalling his correspondences. My scientific correspondences were quite valuable in shaping my writing style. I would correspond with many other scientists, sharing my observations and theories, and receiving feedback and advice in return. Darwin pauses, his expression becoming more serious. Many of these correspondences pushed me to refine my writing and make my ideas clearer and more concise. Sometimes, of course, these correspondences led to heated debates and even conflicts, but they were always stimulating and enriching. Darwin nods thoughtfully. Yes, on a few occasions I did borrow phrasing from poetry or literature in my scientific work. For example, I recall using the phrase tree of life to describe the common ancestry of all life on Earth. Darwin pauses, a slight smile on his face. This phrase, of course, has its origins in the Bible, and I thought it was quite apt for describing the interconnectedness of all living things. Darwin pauses, deep in thought. There were many concepts in evolution that were quite challenging to put into words, but I would say that the concept of sexual selection was among the most difficult. Darwin rubs his forehead. Many people at the time, especially those with religious beliefs, had difficulty accepting the idea that sexual selection could play a significant role in evolution. It was a highly controversial theory, and I had to be quite careful with my phrasing to avoid causing unnecessary offense. Darwin nods, a slight frown on his face. Yes, I frequently found myself debating with myself over the emotional weight of certain terms. Words like struggle, conflict, and war all implied a sense of violence and competition. Darwin pauses, looking a little troubled, but I had to be careful with my language. While these concepts were key to understanding the process of evolution, I did not want to imply that evolution itself was driven by a violent, bloody process. Darwin's face softens, his expression becoming more nostalgic. I must admit, I was quite pleased when the word evolution began to gain popularity. It was a concise and elegant term that captured the essence of my theory quite well, and it quickly became widely accepted among the scientific community. Darwin's expression becomes more serious. However, I was also concerned that some people might use the word too loosely or even distort its meaning. I attempted to define the term precisely in my work to avoid any misunderstandings. Darwin chuckles a little, recalling his lectures. Yes, I did somewhat simplify my language when giving lectures compared to my writing. When writing, I could take my time to carefully craft my words and express myself clearly. But when lecturing, I had to consider the time limits and the attention span of my audience. Darwin pauses, a fond look on his face. I found that simplification was often necessary to make my points more understandable and engaging. I tried to use plainer language and avoided using jargon when possible. Darwin thinks for a moment, his expression becoming quite wistful. It was quite a challenge to describe the beauty of nature, without sounding unscientific, but I did my best to find the right balance. In Darwin pauses, I always sought to acknowledge the scientific principles underlying natural systems, but I also wanted to convey the incredible beauty and elegance of the natural world. Darwin smiles slightly. In The Origin of Species, I included descriptions of birds, butterflies, and other creatures that I found particularly beautiful, but I always tried to connect these descriptions to the scientific concepts I was explaining. Darwin chuckles, "Oh, I did pick up a few linguistic habits while I was at Cambridge, yes. Many of the professors and students there had quite a lofty way of speaking, and I found myself adopting some of their mannerisms." Darwin pauses, furrowing his brow. Words like ergo and hence became quite common in my vocabulary, as they were quite popular among the scholars at Cambridge. Darwin's face softens, as if recalling memories. My journal entries were much more informal and personal than my formal publications. In my journal, I was free to write about my thoughts, feelings, and observations without worrying too much about scientific precision. Darwin pauses, a slight smile playing on his lips. My journal was a place for me to let loose and express myself freely. I often used colloquial language and even poetry in my journal entries, which would have been unthinkable in my formal publications. Darwin ponders the question, his expression becoming quite serious. Yes, there were some words that I avoided because they carried too much philosophical baggage. The word teleology, for example, was quite problematic for me, as it implied a preordained purpose or design in the process of evolution. Darwin pauses, a frown appearing on his forehead. I believed strongly in the materialistic, mechanistic view of nature, and the idea of design or purpose was quite antithetical to my worldview. Darwin frowns slightly, recalling past criticisms. Ah, yes, I often faced criticism that my writing was either too dry or too florid. Some readers found my descriptions and explanations to be too dull and technical, while others found them to be too imaginative and flowery. Darwin pauses, drumming his fingers on the table. It was quite a delicate balancing act. Too dry and my writing became dull and tedious. Too florid, and I risked losing the scientific rigor and clarity of my message. Darwin nods, a small smile playing on his lips. Yes, I did adapt my vocabulary to better suit American readers at times. In the United States, I noticed that certain terms and phrases were used quite differently than in England, and I tried to use language that would be readily understood by my American audience. Darwin pauses for a moment, chuckling softly. I must admit, it could be quite challenging at times to keep track of all the different dialects and colloquialisms used in the United States. Darwin rubs his chin, thinking back to his early drafts. Yes, I remember struggling a lot with choosing between the words variation and mutation in my early drafts. Darwin pauses, looking quite serious. Both terms were quite important to my theory, but they had slightly different meanings and connotations. Variation implied that organisms could change slightly within a species, while mutation implied a more sudden, radical change. Darwin thinks for a moment, his eyes lightening up with enthusiasm. Ah, indeed there were. I found many terms from geology to be quite useful in my work in biology. Words like formation, strata, and fossil all had quite precise and apt meanings in the context of geology, and I found that they could be easily adapted to describe biological phenomena as well. Darwin ponders the question, his expression becoming quite serious. Well, it was quite important to me that my writing reflected observation rather than speculation. I always tried to ground my ideas in empirical evidence and observations, and I spent a great deal of time collecting and analyzing data to support my theories. Darwin rubs his chin, thinking for a moment. Sometimes it was difficult to strike the right balance. I did occasionally speculate on how certain processes might have occurred, but I always made it clear that I was presenting a hypothesis rather than a proven fact. Darwin smiles a little, recalling past writing sessions. Yes, I did sometimes play with word order in order to emphasize a point in my arguments. I found that varying the order of words and phrases could make my arguments more persuasive and impactful. Darwin pauses for a moment, a smile still on his face. For example, I might move an adjective to the beginning of a sentence to make it more prominent, or change the order of clauses to put the strongest points at the beginning. It was a useful rhetorical device. Darwin frowns slightly, recalling past debates with creationists. Yes, I did pick up some rhetorical strategies from debates with creationists. I found that they had quite a knack for twisting words and using logical fallacies to support their point of view. Darwin pauses for a moment, a look of concentration on his face. Of course, I always tried to stick to the facts and empirical evidence when debating with creationists, but I did learn to identify and counter some of their common arguments and tactics. Darwin thinks for a moment, recalling his letters to friends. Well, my letters to friends were quite different linguistically from those to colleagues. With friends, I felt more comfortable using informal language and expressing my emotions more freely. It was a chance to relax and let my guard down, so to speak. Darwin pauses, a warm smile on his face. In contrast, my letters to colleagues were more formal and professional in tone. I tried to maintain a level of objectivity and stick to scientific facts when corresponding with colleagues. Darwin smiles wryly, clearly remembering past discussions about the term. I must admit, I had mixed feelings about the term Darwinism emerging during my lifetime. On one hand, it was quite gratifying to see my ideas take on a life of their own and begin to be discussed openly by the public. Darwin pauses, his expression becoming more contemplative. On the other hand, I was somewhat wary of the term being corrupted and misused. Darwinism had come to be associated with all sorts of ideas that I had not myself advanced. Darwin thinks for a moment, considering past idiomatic expressions. Yes, there were certainly idioms of my time that shaped how I described competition in nature. For example, I often used the phrase survival of the fittest to describe the competitive struggle for existence among organisms. This expression was already in use in English, and I found it quite apt for describing the process of natural selection. Darwin pauses, a smile on his face. Of course, I did not coin the phrase myself. It was popularized by Herbert Spencer, if I recall correctly. Darwin pauses, clearly recalling the difficulty of describing long time spans. Yes, that was quite a challenge. Describing processes that take millions of years in a single sentence was not easy. I found myself resorting to analogies and metaphors quite often, trying to make the concept more comprehensible to the reader. Darwin pauses, frowning slightly. For example, I often compared evolutionary changes to the slow and gradual wearing away of rock by flowing water. It was a clumsy comparison, but it did help to convey the idea of slow, step-by-step change over time. Darwin rubs his chin, clearly remembering his reading of Malthus. Oh, my reading of Malthus definitely influenced my choice of words about population. Malthus's theories on population growth and its potential to outstrip food supplies had quite an impact on my thinking about natural selection. Darwin pauses for a moment, a serious expression on his face. I found that Malthus's ideas provided a framework for understanding competition and natural selection. I often used phrases like struggle for existence and selection to describe the process of natural selection, as they had clear ties to Malthus' ideas. Darwin chuckled softly, recalling his own writing habits. Oh, yes, I did notice some linguistic tics in my own work over time. I had a habit of using certain words and phrases quite frequently, and they became a bit of a signature in my writing. Darwin pauses, a slight smile on his face. For example, I often use the words remarkable and wonderful to describe natural phenomena, and I had a tendency to use long, complex sentences that contain multiple clauses and subordinating conjunctions. Darwin ponders the question, a serious expression on his face. I wanted my words to inspire future generations of scientists to continue exploring the natural world and to build upon the foundations I had laid. I wanted my writings to be a catalyst for further study and discoveries, and to help people understand the complexity and beauty of the natural world. Darwin pauses, a look of determination in his eyes. I hoped that my words would help to ignite a passion for science and a sense of wonder at the beauty and diversity of life on Earth. Darwin gives a hearty laugh, clearly amused, I must say. That was quite an enjoyable experience. Your questions were quite thoughtful and well prepared. You certainly know your stuff.
Mics on the floor where they drop like bombs. Faceless voices running all the cons. Digital whispers in a binary night. No light, no face, pure sound, no sight. Stories unfold in the dark, unscrolled. Echoes of silence, secrets untold. Waves crash loud in this audio cave. No light, no fame, just the sound we crave. Tune in, turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Hidden in shadows, voices untamed. No need for spotlight, no claim to fame. Just the beat of life in a stream of thought. Every word a punchline, no need to be taught. Just listen close, no visuals needed. Raw conversation, unprocessed, unseated. Feel the pulse in every sentence said. No distractions, just thoughts in your head. Whispers of the streets, rumbling through. Faceless yet vivid, a world in view. No mic, just souls, connecting in flow. Pure and raw, let the rhythm go. Pure and raw. Pure and raw. Turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Tune in, turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Pure and raw.
Okay.